Hey everybody, CVH here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Brynjolf's Heist pre-constructed deck. This is one of the 5 pre-constructed decks that came out alongside Heroes of Skyrim, and we're doing a subset right now in the Budget-ify series. Usually in the Budget-ify series I look at an established archetype and I make it more budget-friendly by removing epics and legendaries and replacing them with commons and rares, but in this sub-series we're looking at the pre-constructed decks like the Brynjolf's Heist deck, and I'm still going to be editing them, and the goal really is to try to make them more playable, more competitively viable, more consistent really, and focus in on what the deck could use going forward while still remaining inside the Budget-ify restraints. This is so a new player could potentially just spend 500 gold on this deck and then start editing things just with a bit of soul gems and not having to purchase Fall of the Dark Brotherhood or Madhouse collection. Obviously in the Budget-ify series I don't use cards from those expansions, even though a couple might wind up in the decks here and there. Just because you need to purchase those expansions with money or gold to get the cards in them. So every replacement I'm going to be making in today's video and in all the Budget-ify videos is going to be commons and rares from the core set in Heroes of Skyrim. So let's buy Brynjolf's Heist and start replacing some cards. Alright, now that we have the Brynjolf's Heist deck and the collection manager here, let's talk a bit about what the deck is trying to do, or at least what we think Bethesda and Direwolf are trying to make the deck do when they included this as a pre-constructed deck. This deck is trying to do a couple different things actually. We see a little bit of emphasis on movement with the Caravan Enforcer. I got some Dune Smugglers and Shadow Shifts to take advantage of that. I have certain feelings about the consistency of that kind of stuff. We also can see that Brynjolf itself cares about Pilfers and Drains. We do have a fair amount of Drain cards in this deck, besides Brynjolf himself, Moonlight Werebat, Giant Bats, Palace Prowler actually pilfers and drains, but it's a pretty weak card overall. Interesting that it's not including a couple pilfer cards that I personally would be including. And the last thing it's really focusing on seems to be actions. There are no Crystal Tower Crafters in the deck, which you might have seen before that was nerfed to a 1/1 from a 2/2. It makes a lot of sense to not include this card now, but it is playing at Lilendril Hex Mages for a little bit of extra reach, a little bit of extra burn at the end of the game with some cheap actions, like the zero cost actions and the Shadow Shifts. But let's start replacing some cards at the low end of the curve for starters and try to make this deck a bit more consistent in what it wants to do. The first thing I'm immediately going to cut, this is what my eyes were drawn to when I first looked at the deck, are the fact that it's playing 3 different zero-cost actions with the Goblin Skulks. Now, you've probably seen Goblin Skulk played in a ton of different decks that use agility, in competitive decks as well, in High Legend, very popular card, but this sort of adds unnecessary RNG to the effect. Goblin Skulk is going to draw a random zero-cost card from your deck, so we could increase the consistency of this card a lot by just figuring out what zero-cost action we want to be playing. What we want to be searching a lot of the time. Occasionally Firebloom's good, occasionally Move in Shadows is good, occasionally Paralyze is good. I'd say Firebloom is the most consistently good of all 3, but honestly they're all just kind of weak compared to a couple cards we could be playing. The 2 I would go to, the first would be maybe Lesser Ward, could be decent. This is something you saw a lot when Crystal Tower Crafter was unnerfed and it was still a reasonable card. Crystal Tower Crafter as a 2/2 into Lesser Ward immediately was insane, but Curse is where we'll be going for today's video, and also where you'll find the vast majority of Goblin Skulk decks searching for. Some of them play instead of Curse, Murkwater Goblin, but those are strictly in the Goblin decks that can really take advantage of the fact that you're getting a zero-cost Goblin. This deck doesn't care about that at all. In fact, it would rather search for an action because of cards like the Lilendril Hex Mage, and Curse is just a great card in general to help fight early for the board. Now, I mentioned Palace Prowler in that it does synergize with the Brynjolf over here. It has Pilfer and Drain, but this deck doesn't really need the excess Magicka a lot. I don't think this deck's going to be having a ton of cards in its hand, and it definitely doesn't have anything that costs too much. So I think I'm actually just going to cut Palace Prowler in favor of a more consistent one-cost card, one-cost creature that is, and that's going to be Crown Quartermaster. Nothing much to say about the Quartermaster except this is an aggressive deck, and this is a way better one-cost creature to get aggressive on the board than the Palace Prowler, which is very, very fragile and needs to live in order to get value. Crown Quartermaster, at least you get the dagger, and if it does live, it pushes for twice as much damage and can trade up with 2-drops. The list goes on. Crown Quartermaster is just a better card. I'm also going to be cutting the Caravan Enforcers. We did take out the 1 Move in Shadows. That's not really why. I just think there are a ton of different 2-drops that are really good, and Caravan Enforcer requires specific situations to be good, so I'll be trying to replace it with things that are more consistent. Speaking of inconsistent cards, gonna be cutting the lock picks here. Sorry everybody, I know I'm the king of lock picks, definitely check out that video, but that does not mean I think this should go in any constructed deck for any reason. I'm going to skip around here and take out the Torval Crook really quickly just so I can use the spot to replace things with the 2 costs I wanted to add in the deck. But Torval Crook, again, it has that, gaining Magicka, and it's a charge and a Pilfer, so it does work with the Brynjolf. It could be a kind of a cute combo when you get it off, but are we really making use of the max Magicka? And is Torval Crook good enough on average? I don't think the answer to either of those questions is yes. So let's take the spots we've just freed up and start replacing with some really consistently good 2 costs that you'd see in a bunch of constructed playable decks. And those are going to be 3 copies of Wardcrafter. Fantastic card to keep our Goblin Skulks alive, and just on anything really. We can use it on Lilendril Hexmage in the late game, and it's probably one of the strongest plays we can just make on turn 2 regardless. And that's also why we're going to be including Daring Cutpurse, a very, very strong early play. And we don't really, have too much Pilfer synergy, just the Brynjolf, but I was surprised that in the Brynjolf deck this card wasn't included. This card is just a pretty fantastic snowball-y card. If it gets out there early and doesn't die or get silenced immediately, it can start getting, to some pretty impressive stats, honestly, and it's one of those cards that you can play early and it just sort of carries a game for you. Another great target for the Wardcrafter we just included. Let's get back into some cuts in the deck, just cards that this deck wasn't maxing out on, and for good reason. They're situational, and we're going to be trying to replace them with cards that are good more often. 2 copies of Giant Bat, decent charge and drain, but I don't really think it pushes enough damage for what it's doing. We are going to be light on 3 drops, by the way, at the end of my replacements, which is kind of bad, but I'll be talking about some cards you could include. Giant Bat doesn't seem like one of the more necessary ones. I also think we can safely get rid of the 2 Riften Pickpockets and 2 Sightless Skulks. We have a bit of card draw in the deck. I'm going to be adding just a bit more, but Sightless Skulk, a bit inconsistent considering we're also dumping some of our cheaper green cards, and Riften Pickpocket kind of depends on what our opponent's playing, and I just think it's a little bit clunky to be playing this card with the Elusive Schemers. I will be adding a 3rd copy of Schemer, which I think I'll just go ahead and do right now. I think it's a better draw option for the deck because we'd rather be drawing our own pieces. We'd rather be drawing the Hex Mages that work with our actions and the actions that work with our Hex Mages. Pickpocket can give you some great cards, but overall, I think Elusive Schemer is a better card for the deck because, we have specific cards that we want to be drawing in conjunction with each other, and it also works really well with Goblin Skulk. If Schemer dies and we're out of curses in the deck, Goblin Skulk can search those 0-cost Elusive Schemers, which can get pretty crazy very quickly. I'm also going to be cutting the 1 copy of Chorus Reaper down here, just a bit expensive, a decent effect, but we are a primarily aggressive deck, and the stats just aren't good enough for a 7 cost, but we will be replacing it somewhat with a card that is a bit similar. Now that we have 6 more slots freed up, let's add some dragons. From Heroes of Skyrim, of course, they're going to be budget dragons, commons and rares, like I promised, but 6 dragons that have just made a huge impact in the competitive decks of the current meta. And that'll be 3 copies of Mystic Dragon, which is good defensively as a prophecy that can swing games back around, and great offensively. You could also play Royal Sage in this slot. I think this deck is a bit light on prophecy, so I'm just going to be including the Mystic Dragons for this video, but Royal Sage is another fantastic aggressive option. And I mentioned a card that was somewhat similar to Chorus Reaper. In fact, they could actually work pretty well together. You don't really need to cut the Chorus Reaper, I just think it's a bit unnecessary. But since we also added the Curse Skulk package, or we added the Curse part of the Curse Skulk package, the Shearpoint Dragons get additional value, and they're just a fantastic card, probably one of the best 6 costs, if not the best 6 costs we could play in Assassin. So we're definitely going to be playing 3 copies of Shearpoint Dragon to take control of the board. Now this deck is just about done, but there is one more card that I'd really like to add 3 copies of since we are an aggressive Assassin deck, and that is the card I affectionately like to call the Green Lightning Bolt Cliff Racer. Cliff Racer is just an amazing aggressive option, and can also sort of function defensively because it can just come down from your hand and trade with something as if it were a removal action, such as the Lightning Bolt. But we have to make room, we can't just play 53 cards like crazy people, so I'll be cutting a couple of the 1-ofs in the deck that don't seem like they're going to get value all the time. Since we're adding more 5-cost cards, we already have 7 in the deck, we're going to be cutting the 1 Thief of Dreams. I definitely wouldn't do this if it were still a 5-5, but it's a 4-4, which makes it just that little bit less valuable. A lot of decks won't play Lilendril Hexmage, depending on where you want to take this deck in the future, how much you want to focus on the actions. You might just want to cut Lilendril Hexmage, check out some of the mid-range Assassin decks on the channel, maybe even the Budget-ify mid-range Assassin we did. You'll see Hexmage doesn't see a ton of play, but since it's part of this pre-constructed deck, I'm leaving it in for now. I don't think it's required at all, maybe it's not even optimal. Speaking of actions, I'm also going to be cutting the 1 Shimmerine Peddler. We have a ton of 2s that are really good on curve now, and Shimmerine can get a bit of card draw going, but I think we have better options for that. And I'm also just going to cut the 3rd copy of Gloomlurker. This is kind of a weird thing to cut. I don't really have a good reason for this other than I think it's probably the weakest of our 2-cost creatures, and given that we've had some good ones now with Wardcrafter and Daring Cutpurse, we really want to make room for those Cliff Racers, so I think it's a fine place to take our final cut. And this is the deck as it stands after the changes. Let's talk about a couple things you could be playing in this deck if you have them or if you acquire them over time. Leaf Lurker comes to mind as one of the most powerful turn 5 options for Assassin if you're playing the Curse Goblin Skulk package. It's just kind of too good to ignore, except for the fact that it's an epic, so we can't be playing it in today's video, but I definitely recommend trying to get your hands on those. You could also go for the more budget Leaf Lurker replacement, and that's Finish Off, and that could actually be good if you are playing the Lilindril Hex Mages still, because it is an action, which might actually work better for your overall game plan. For the 2 costs, we pretty much have everything we need except for Mournhold Trader, which would be an amazing card if you're really going for the aggro plan, because it pushes just an insane amount of damage for a 2-cost card. And I mentioned the 3 costs being a bit weak. Brotherhood Slayer, I can't speak this card's praises enough. It's insanely good card from Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, even more so if you have those powerful turn 5 cards to play early, and even more so if one of those is Lilindril Hexmage and you can use those completed contracts that you get off the Slayer as an additional 2 points of damage. I was also considering cutting the Dune Smugglers from this build, but I thought I made enough changes. You could play Black Sap Protectors over them, Elder Gleam Matron to get some more threats in your hand, House Kinsman if you have them. There's a lot of good 3-drops, and Dune Smuggler, without the movement, might not be that good, but it's still pretty solid to keep during Cut Purse, Goblin Skulk, and if you're playing Mournhold Traders, keep them out of harm's way. Not a bad card by any means. Also, Queen Baron Zaya should be one of the priority crafts. It's Queen Baron Zaya, I think, and Tazcad the Packmaster has really crazy legendaries for this deck, but we can't also forget the Encano, which is another card from one of these pre-constructed decks. If you can pick that one up as well, Encano should definitely be in here. Amazing card to help close the game. If you're looking for space for the removal, by the way, I don't think Assassin's Ritual needs to be in here, especially if you're winding up cutting the Lilindril Hex Mages. But yeah, Encano, Tazcad, and the Queen Baron Zaya are pretty much going to be seen in all the mid-range assassin decks. You'll see on the ladder if they're top tier. And for another solid 3 cost that I didn't mention, there's completed contracts, obviously. You could make the deck more blue and go for the Cunning Ally approach, but of course, if you have the Soul Gems, 3 copies of Daggerfall Mage, it's hard to make a deck worse by including 3 copies of Daggerfall Mage unless it's completely aggro-oriented, and this deck does take it a bit later, so Daggerfall, a fine value option, and can also help with some of the card draw as well. Those are just some options though. Nothing I said there you could really not find by checking out one of the mid-range assassin videos on the channel or just anywhere else on the internet. A lot of those cards that I mentioned are pretty staple, and this is sort of a, I don't want to say gimmicky version of it, but it is, you know, doing some interesting things with the elusive schemers, the skulks. With the skulks, obviously Skulk is played in almost all of the assassin decks you'll see. The Brynjolf, I think, is actually moving into being a consistent inclusion in assassin decks, so that's good there. But the Hex Mages in particular are kind of awkward, so we'll see if we can get some value out of them. We are playing 14 actions, maintain 12 prophecies, which is pretty good too. Going to be playing this deck pretty aggressively with some strong tempo options with our removal, now that we have the Skulk Curse package and the Sheer Point Dragons. So let's move into some gameplay and casual and see if we can't talk about some lines of play. And as always, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, stay subscribed to the channel for more Legends content, follow my stream in the description, and I'll see you guys next time. Got a Battle Mage first. Battle Mage traditionally pretty aggressive, so I'll be shipping, wow, all new cards in the deck. I'm going to keep you the 1-drop, definitely. Definitely good to have a 1-drop, and our preferred 2-drop now. Or one of the preferred 2-drops, obviously Goblin Skulk is hard to say no to. But Daring Cutpurse is a close second for us, I think.
I keep a spare blade in my boot.
Well, there is the Goblin Skulk, so let's jam that to the boards. Knowing that we can get those curses guaranteed. It's nice to not have 3-0 cost actions of the deck saying, oh, which one are we going to get today? Definitely preferable.
By the 8th, they will meet their makers.
I definitely think we should search for a curse and hit a bit more. Alright, so here I'm actually going to be shadow shifting over the Skulk, trying to keep it alive for another turn, and also playing the Daring Cutpurse. Yeah, I'd rather get the Cutpurse out there than Wordcrafter my 2-1. We could also use the curse on the Daggerfall and make it a 1-1. That would guarantee to keep the Skulk alive, but he could still attack into the 2-1. We could have this turn, after we actually shadow shifted, we could use the curse and the Wardcrafter, but of course, then we don't really need to curse it if we're ward crafting up anyway, and we've already moved the 2-2. So I think this is fine.
Their defenses crumble.
Oh, I didn't mention this, by the way, but if you do want to keep the action focus on this deck with Lilendril Hex Mages, which again, I'm not sure that I recommend, you could also play Crushing Blow and Ice Spike. Just burn actions that guarantee, or try to guarantee, that you'll get enough damage out of those kinds of cards. Alright, so here, let's attack with the Goblin Skulk, and then go in with the Daring Cupper, so hopefully we don't hit anything here. Good. And we could just go for Thieves Guild and Wardcrafter. Wardcrafter can protect our 3/3 Daring Cutpurse over there. Could even double curse that if we wanted. Not sure how good that is, but it would let us take back the field lane. But I think we can use these with Lilendril Hexmage later for more value.
What have we here? Careful there, friend.
If we do have the Hex Mages in the deck in this version, we should try to play to them.
Sheol take you. I am ready to join the circle.
The signs are but you.
Destinies fulfilled.
It's putting a bit of damage out there, but I'm not scared yet. We have 5 on the board and a lot from hand. Look at the Cliff Racers, just giving us that extra reach. I think I will just go completely face here.
Blood will spill.
Even with Thieves Guild, because we can just use Curse to take care of that. And go ahead and play Cliff Racer. I'll put it in the left because in order to trade with that, he would have to use the Tome, and that'll take up his entire turn. Or almost his entire turn. And we just need a bit more of the damage on board to go through because we already have 8 more damage on the board over the next couple turns, even 9 if we want to Steel Dagger something up. So basically, as long as one of these 2 attack creatures lives, we can win the game in 2 turns. Unless he somehow manages to take off enough damage and also threaten me enough to where I have to start playing defensively, but I don't think that's possible here. Forced into the trades. You have a lot of damage, but not quite enough. Let's attack him.
Blood will spill.
Scales move in shadow.
Yeah, it's Battle Mage, right? So, even though it's more magic efficient to do other things, we could just do this. Go ahead and curse. Could have even used the Steel Dagger there, I suppose. But he is at 4, and we have a Lightning Bolt in hand, and we have successfully aggroed him down. And I don't think he's going to be able to heal this turn. There are very few ways a Battle Mage can actually find any ways to gain life. And I'm just going to assume that even if he can clear my entire board or shackle it, he'll die to the bolts. Yeah, you'd rather save the bolts than the Cliff Racers usually, because Cliff Racer doesn't always have the ability to get 4 damage in. Could be blocked by 2 guards or something. And Lightning Bolt just always gets 4 damage wherever you want it. I got all day. All day. Alright, let's get him. We can't even do anything fun. Alright, so that's a bit of the Budget-ify Brynjolf's Heist deck. Hopefully you guys enjoyed.